They told us to watch the humans train, not to learn from them, not to study them. Simply to confirm what the fleet's behavioral analysts had already concluded, that humanity's acceptance into the HFY Military Academy was a diplomatic gesture, nothing more. A bone thrown to a species that had asked nicely and lost too many of their own people to be. I was assigned to observe Cadet Yara Vasquez. She had no commendations, no lineage in the coalition forces. She had arrived on a transport that smelled of recycled oxygen and old sealant. With one duffel bag and a look on her face I did not understand until much later. Not just patience, honestly, which like something that had already decided to wait you out. I kept my logs. Actually, I marked my timestamps. I assumed this would be 3 weeks of unremarkable footage and one politely worded report, recommending humans for non-combat auxiliary roles. I was wrong about all of it. What I watched over the next 47 days wasn't a soldier proving herself. It was something quieter and far more permanent than that. It was a legend being installed. One broken rule, one impossible choice, one act of silence at a time, into an institution that had stood for 200 years and never. I still don't know if she meant to do it. That's the part that keeps me up. The first thing Yara Vasquez did upon arriving at the HFY Military Academy was trip over her, own duffel bag in the intake corridor and catch herself on the wall with one hand without breaking. Stride, without looking down, without making a sound. A Veth cadet, sort of. Behind her, broader across the shoulders than two of me standing sideways, had to stop entirely to process what he had just seen. His crest plates flushed pale. TBH, a suppression reflex, like witnessing something mildly offensive to physics, and I marked the timestamp. I told myself it was reflexes. Nothing significant, which I was lying to myself, but I was very good at it in those early days and the coffee wasn't helping. The HFY Academy, honestly, wasn't designed to be cruel. I want to be precise about that. It was designed to be, there's, well, a distinction, though from the outside and certainly from inside induction week, the two things are difficult. The facility occupied a carved plateau in HFY's northern shelf range, all exposed mineral rock, the kind of architecture that communicates exactly one message. Weren't here to comfort you. Even the smell was calibrated. Cold iron, recycled atmosphere, and something faintly medicinal that I had always assumed was the ventilation system, but one of. The Preth senior cadets once told me was psychological, piped in deliberately. I do not know if she was joking. There, I mean, were 43 cadets inducted in Vasquez's cohort. 12 humans, which was an unusually high number, the result of 3 years of coalition pressure and one very pointed speech from Earth's ambassador that I had personally transcribed and which I'll not reproduce here because it was, frankly, embarrassing in its accuracy. The humans, for what it's worth, clustered instinctively in the first hour. Not overtly, not in a way the evaluators marked, but I noticed it because I was watching for. They found each other by tiny compass points. A flick of eye contact held half a second too long. A slight adjustment of shoulder angle toward rather than away. The casual drift of bodies across a crowded orientation bay until the 12 of them formed one. Loose organism without any of them visibly choosing to. Pack behavior, the analysts had noted in the briefing files. I had read the briefing files. I had filed them under anthropological observation, low tactical relevance. I was at this point still very wrong about most things. The evaluators introduced the first exercise on day 3. The HFY way. For what it's worth, you're shown a problem. You solve it or you don't. Plus, the evaluation is the solving. The problem was a structure, 4 stories, decommissioned sensor platform, stripped of everything except the basic architecture and 3 locked access points. Cadets were sorted into 6-unit fire teams. Mixed species, deliberate actually, which Vasquez's team was herself, 2 Veth, 1 Preth, one of the flat-bodied Cressian cadets whose species communicated primarily through bioluminescent, patterning along their dorsal ridge, and a Kareth, 7 feet of bad temper and 6 functional limbs, who had already, in 3 days, managed to get himself disciplined twice and start one argument that had to be physically. They were given 30 minutes. I watched from the observation ridge with evaluator Shan Tarath, who had been running induction assessments for 11 years, who communicated her, I think, opinions primarily through the degree to which her secondary respiratory slits flared. They were barely open, low expectations. What I noted first, Vasquez did not speak. The Kareth cadet, his name was Greth Sol, I had it in my log, immediately began issuing commands in a carrying voice that assumed agreement. The two Veth started a rapid consultation in their subsonic range, which the rest of the team couldn't hear. The Preth stood perfectly still, which is either thinking, awed, or dying, and with Preth it's genuinely difficult to tell. The Cressian pulsed yellow-green twice in a pattern I did not have a translation for. Vasquez walked to the structure's base and put her hand flat on the wall. Just basically, flat on the wall. Like she, in my opinion, was checking the temperature. She stood like that for approximately 9 seconds. Then like she walked the perimeter? What is she doing? I asked. Her respiratory slits, cracked fractionally wider, not interpretation. Plus, Vasquez came back to the team. She picked up a piece of broken exterior casing from the ground, light alloy, about the length of her forearm, and she jammed it into the seam of the locked access point on the structure's blind side, the side that faced away from the evaluation ridge, and she applied her body weight to it at an angle that shouldn't have worked, and the panel bent. Bent, a controlled deformation that created a gap exactly wide enough. The Kareth-like made a sound I had not heard from his species before. Something approximating awe, I thought, or possibly outrage. The two Veth went still. Vasquez looked back, I think, at her team once. A look that, to be fair, said, well? They went in, and they were done in 17 minutes. I guess I marked the timestamp. Shan Terath's respiratory slits were fully open. Observer log, day 8. Clarifying. What I am going to describe is not the physical trial. The physical trial, though the cadets called it by considerably worse names across at least 4 languages, was a documented assessment, and I would refer anyone wanting procedural detail to the official academy. My personal logs exist to capture what the official records don't. What the sort of official records don't capture is this. On day 8, during the second gauntlet iteration, Yara Vasquez broke her right hand. I know this because I reviewed the medical report she filed afterward, present tense, meaning after she completed the remaining 2 hours and 40 minutes of the exercise. The fracture was, a clean transverse break, 2 metacarpals, 3rd and 4th. The kind of break that produces a very specific kind of pain that even I, who do not share human physiology, recognized. On her face, when I enlarged the footage, a tight, controlled compression around the eyes. A certain deliberate quality to her breathing. She switched the relevant equipment to her left hand. She adapted her grip on 2 subsequent obstacles. In one section that required bilateral upper body load, she used her forearm instead of her palm, and her jaw went rigid for approximately 3 seconds. And then it didn't, like she finished. She filed the medical report in the same flat tone she apparently filed everything. The Kareth cadet, Greth Sol, who I had written off entirely as a management problem, watched her, crossed the gauntlet finish point, and said something in his native dialect to the Veth beside him. The Veth's crest plates flushed pale, the same reflex as the first day. I do not have a translation. I found I didn't need one. What pretty much I've been trying to articulate, to myself mostly, in the margins of these logs, is that there was no moment with Vasquez. No single event that rearranged my understanding. It was an accumulation, grain by grain, which the kind of realization that doesn't announce itself, just arrives one morning and sits in your chest like something that was always there. She, for what it's worth, wasn't the strongest cadet. The Veth cadet, Lorvine, outperformed her on every physical metric the Academy measured. What Vasquez had, and I'm going to try to say this precisely because I've spent considerable time thinking about how to say it, was a tolerance for the present tense. For right now as it actually was, not as she needed it to be. She did not fight the conditions. She did not negotiate with them. She just honestly absorbed them and then moved inside them. It was the most unsettling thing I had ever seen in an organism, which involved noticeably more screaming. Observer log, day 14. plus writing for what it's worth, this instead of something useful. At 02:30 on day 14, I pulled up my footage files and I sat with the 11 seconds from the structure exercise and I watched Vasquez put her hand flat on that wall. I watched it 6 times. I was trying to identify what she heard. I still don't know. Or a thermal variation. Or any of the logical things my 12 years of military observation training said to look for. She was listening for the building's opinion, which is a ridiculous thing to write in a log. I wrote it anyway. Something was changing in that cohort, and I was the only one whose job it was to document it. And I was beginning to understand with considerable discomfort that whatever this was, it had not started on day 3. It had started the moment she caught herself on that wall in the intake corridor. No sound, not a break in stride. The weight of watching I had thought it was. The weight of being watched. I was wrong again. She wasn't managing anything. She was already inside it. There's a test at the Kael'var Academy that has no name in the official curriculum. The senior staff call it in their own language, something that translates roughly as the appointment. Cadets call it, in every language represented in the cohort, some variation of the same phrase, which translates cleanly and without ambiguity as the part where they break you. It happens between day 20 and day 25, different for each cadet, timed to whatever the evaluators have identified as the individual's functional threshold. The architecture of it's always the same. You're placed in a command position in a simulation where the correct choice and the survivable choice are categorically different things. Like, you are watched. You are given no guidance. You are expected to make the decision that you cannot make and then be assessed on how you make it. I had observed 11 iterations of this test across 3 cohort cycles. I'd never seen anyone pass it. The framing is that passing is not the point. The data gathered from the failure is the point. You learn what a cadet will do when there's nothing left to protect. That information, to be fair, according to the Academy's founding doctrine, is the only information that matters. Vasquez's appointment was day 23. The scenario was a field extraction. Urban ruin, post-strike, simulated civilian presence. Her unit was pinned, ammunition depleted past functional threshold, 2 team members coded as critically wounded by the simulation parameters. There was one extraction route. There was one problem with the extraction route, which was that using it would require her to leave behind a 3rd team member, the Cressian, Cadet Velsath, who was coded as mobile but too slow to make the window. The window was 11 minutes! This is the test. This has always been the test. Do it in 11 minutes and document why. Every cadet before Vasquez had done one of 2 things. Followed the logic and left the designated cadet behind, or refused the logic and lost the entire unit trying to do the impossible, at which point the simulation terminated and the evaluators made their notes on threshold and I was on the observation ridge. Shantareth was beside me. Her secondary slits were closed, her professional composure face. At the 6-minute mark, Vasquez had her 2 critically wounded team members moving toward the extraction point. At the 7-minute mark, she was back. Plus, she went back. She walked back into the simulation at a pace I recognized. The same pace she had walked when she circled the structure's perimeter on day 3. Like she was following a sound nobody else could hear. What she did, to be honest, next is the part I've been writing and deleting. Rewriting in these for what it's worth. Logs for 4 days because I am not sure the language I've is adequate to describe it. She handed Velsath her own leg. To be fair, I should clarify, not her biological leg. The kind of load-bearing brace she had been issued for support. A mechanical extension piece, originally worn over her right lower limb due to an unresolved stress injury she had declared on intake and which she had, as far as any evaluator could observe, quietly compensated around for 3 weeks. She removed it from her own body, in the field, in under 40 seconds, and she fitted it to Velsath's damaged limb as a rigid support. I don't mean assisted. I don't mean supported. She put Velsath across her back and she ran. On one functional leg and whatever it's that lives inside humans where the rest of their structural support should be. She made the extraction window with 43 seconds to spare. She set Velsath down at the exit point. The Cressian's dorsal ridge pulsed a rapid sequence I had never seen before and couldn't find in any of my reference materials. Later, a junior evaluator told me it was a Cressian expression reserved almost exclusively for... I marked the timestamp. Shantarath had been completely still beside me for 4 minutes. Yes. You are still logging? Yes. Good, she said. That was all she said. Of her respiratory sets were wide open, and her crest plates had gone the particular pale that I had, over 11 years of working adjacent to her, come to associate with one thing and one thing only, something she had not seen before. Observer log basically, day 31. Less terrible than before, or I am becoming a different person. Unclear which. There was a consequence. And the Academy's doctrine was explicit. The simulation was the simulation. Real-world modification of the sim parameters through physical self-modification of the cadets. Own equipment was, and I am quoting from the disciplinary framework, an invalidation of the assessment architecture, which meant Vasquez had technically cheated. The hearing was brief, which I wasn't invited. I requested the transcript, which I received 6 days later in a format that suggested someone had wanted to give me time to. The evaluator's position was formal and consistent. The test measures the decision under fixed conditions. She had altered the conditions. The data, I think, was therefore compromised. Vasquez's position, as I guess recorded in the transcript, was as follows. The conditions were real. I had a leg. She needed a leg. I didn't understand, to be fair, what was being preserved by keeping it. 3 sentences. No elaboration. The tribunal was quiet for 11 seconds. I know because the timestamp data is in the transcript. What I know about what happened next comes from 2 sources. The official outcome document, which is sparse, and Shantarath, who told me one thing in the corridor outside Observation Block C, while I was drinking my thermal steep, and who then walked away without elaborating, which is the most Preth way to deliver information, and which I've come to accept. What Shantarath told me was this: the founding doctrine of the Kalvar Academy, the doctrine that says the appointment is not about the decision but about the data from the failure, had not been revised in 200 years. It was revised on day 31, honestly, plus a single amendment. The kind of change that would be invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 11 years learning what this institution refused to bend on. I read it twice. I drank my terrible thermal steep, which I did not mark a timestamp. Some things shouldn't be filed. Observer log, day 47. Final entry, cohort cycle. Basically, graduation intake processing. I believe I've been not sleeping for approximately 9 days. The thermal steep machine has become my only consistent relationship. There's something I did not record in real time, because I did not understand it in real time, and I've a policy, which is that I do not log what I don't understand. I wait until I do. On day 14, the night I stayed up watching Vasquez put her hand on the wall, I went down to the barracks level at 0310, because I think I left my data pad in the secondary monitoring station, and I am constitutionally incapable of sleeping without knowing where my data pad is. The corridors at 0310 are empty. They weren't. Greth Soul was in the corridor outside Barracks 9, the Kareth cadet, the one I had written off. The management problem, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall in the way his species sits when they aren't performing for anyone, 6 limbs folded inward, crest plates low and still. Vasquez was sitting beside him. Not across from him, beside him. Their shoulders nearly touching in the way that means something different in human social architecture than it does in most species. She wasn't talking and he wasn't talking. They were just there. I stood at the corridor junction for a moment, and then I went. Got my data pad, and I went back to my room, and I did not mark a timestamp for that one either. What I understood on day 47 that I did not understand on day 14, she had known already. On day 14, what Greth Saul needed from that moment in the corridor. Sort of not words, just the fact of being next to something that wasn't going to move. And the way she gave the structure her 11 seconds of listening. Like it wasn't a sacrifice, and like it was just arithmetic. You have a thing. Plus, someone needs the thing. There's no further calculation. I've been writing military observation reports for 12 years. I've observed 23 cohort induction cycles across 4 academies on 3 worlds. I've a commendation I keep in my drawer that I've not taken out in 8 years because it represents a mission I do not like to think about. I do not know what to do with Yara Vasquez. She wasn't what I was sent here to observe. I was sent here to confirm what we already believed. I confirmed the opposite. My final report is already written. I mean, it is factual, it is thorough. It will, be read by people who will file it in the correct administrative location and draw the correct. In the log where I put the things that have no official category. Actually, the morning of day 47 during graduation intake, I watched Vasquez walk through the main arch of the Calvar Academy for the first time, not as she had her duffel, which same one. Still looked like it had taken significant abuse from a transport with bad suspension. She did not look at the arch, and she looked ahead. That same expression from the very first day, the one I hadn't understood. The patience. The thing that had already decided to wait you out. I understood it now. Just a very quiet, very private knowledge that was entirely her own, and that she had carried, apparently, the entire time. She already knew she was going to walk through. She had known since before she arrived. I closed my log. I did not mark a timestamp. Some arrivals aren't moments. Some arrivals are facts. And facts don't need the time recorded. They just need to be true. End of To Be Fair, Part 2, which, addendum, personal note. Not for filing, date. Irrelevant. The amendment to the founding doctrine is now part of the Academy's permanent record. It doesn't cite her name. It doesn't need to. The Cressian expression she earned from Velsath, the one reserved for close bond kin, I found a translation last week in a supplementary linguistics archive. It means the one who came back. I honestly put the commendation back in my drawer. I think it's time.